Do you sometimes wish you had a fairy godmother or an allo parent who was just a little bit older and a little bit wiser, who could share their experiences with you and reassure you that it's all going to be okay, and then help you adjust and realign to your values when you weren't quite parenting in the way that you hoped? My guests today, Jennifer and Janet, are exactly that. They are the hosts of the podcast On Boys. And I was so delighted to have them come on and share their experiences of breastfeeding their babies. And I know that you will gain so much from this enlightening conversation. Enjoy.
I'm Janet Allison, and I am the founder of Boys Alive and the co-host of the On Boys Parenting podcast. And it's kind of funny because I'm all about boys, but I raised daughters. My daughters are in their mid-30s now, but the best part then becomes I am now a grandmama, or Oma, as he now calls me, to Bo, who is 17 months. So very fun.
I've heard you talk about him.
Have you?
Yeah.
Anybody who's listened to the podcast has heard about him.
Yes.
That's so great.
And I am Jennifer L.W. Fink. I co-host On Boys podcast. I am the founder and creator of Building Boys, and recently published the book, Building Boys, Raising Great Guys in a World That Misunderstands Males. And as Janet sort of alluded to, I came to this because I am a parent of boys. I have 4 children. They all happen to be sons, and that led me into this work.
Yeah, that's really great. There's a couple of things that I heard on some of your recent podcast episodes. I just recently discovered your podcast, so I haven't gone back into the archives yet. But in some of the recent episodes, I've heard one of the points that was really poignant to me was that a lot of people are kind of afraid of raising boys now, given the current climate, because, of course, we want to raise boys that are kind and respectful and understand consent, for instance. I don't know if those words were exactly used, but that was kind of the takeaway that I was understanding. And so people kind of come down more harshly on their boys as a result and forget that they sometimes is counterproductive to what they want to do in the end, what they're trying to do. And so I love that you bring on all these, not only are you two very smart and come to what you're talking about with so much compassion for the parents, but you bring on so many guests who have this perspective that brings to the topic so much depth. Like Sue Atkins, she was on, and all three of you have adult children. So those of us who are still raising our kids, it gives us this perspective that, oh yeah, it's the long game. I want to have a really great relationship with my kids when they're adults. So what is going to get me there in this moment when I'm trying to get my child to put their shoes on or to come down for dinner, right?
Yeah, the long game. And I'm going to imagine that many of your listeners are in those months and years of just like, oh my gosh, this is really hard. And we're out here cheering you on and saying, you can do this, you got this. And I'm going to guess that most of your listeners are moms. And so being a mom of a boy is really different than being a mom of a girl, because it just is, as Jen can attest to. And Jen, you didn't say the ages of your kids yet, but they're 17 and up. So
I love that you know this. Yes, they're 17 and up. 17, 20, 22, and 25.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you're on, you've made it to the other side, basically. Yeah. Just about.
I mean, yeah, sort of. But as anybody who's raised children to young adult age, especially boys to that age, no, I am still very much holding my breath and saying my prayers.
Right.
Always.
Yeah. I know. I heard some listener questions. I think it was in the Sue Atkins episode. You had some listener questions of some parents who were really worried about their young adult men, and essentially you don't have control of them. And the thing about raising children is you actually don't have control of any other human being. So how do you invite cooperation?
But one of the beautiful things, and I'm sure you found this as well, Janet, like when you get to the stage where you very much realize how little control you have that foundation that you laid in those early years. It doesn't go away. It might not seem like that made a difference. And certainly when your kids are, teens or tweens, they're not necessarily thanking you for all of that, but that foundation is still there.
Thank you for that deep foundation you laid with me, Mom. As I stomp off to my room.
Yes.
Right. Okay, so that was a beautiful segue, talking about deep foundations that you lay in the early years, for us to then begin talking about the baby years. So I'm going to get you to open up your treasure trove of memories. And I actually am going to take you way back into your childhood, into your upbringing. And I want you to think about what your exposure to baby feeding was as just like young girls. Did you ever see anybody feed a baby with their body before? Did anyone ever talk to you about that? Tell me a little bit about that.
Go, Janet. I'm so curious.
Way back. Way back. So,
and it's like back when there were dinosaurs on the
back when the dinosaurs. I mean, I was born in the late 50s, so my mom was very much a 50s mom. Her childbirth experiences were twilight sleep. She had 4 children. And fast forward to 1988 when I was having my second daughter, and I had a C-section with my first, and then I had a VBAC with my second. Home birth after C-section. I still have doctors who shudder. Oh my gosh, I can't believe you did that. I did that. And my mom was coming to visit, and she's like, have the baby before I get there. And of course, I went into labor when she got there, but I hadn't had the baby. And I had a very long labor. And I offered her to go to a neighbor's, like, you can go to my friend's house and it's fine. And she was like, no, I'm not leaving. And so she got the full experience, and bless her heart, she was in there all night long. And after the birth, bringing me, I'll never forget, she brought me little watermelon pieces on a skewer, and it was the best thing. And then probably I just had to chuckle afterwards, because she's on the phone to her twin sister going, midwives, home birth, this is the best thing ever. I couldn't believe it. And what I realized, and it still gives me chills to think about, I'm going to cry, is she had never witnessed a birth.
I was just about to say, this experience probably brought her healing that she didn't even know she needed, having had twilight births herself. Yeah.
Wow.
And having lost one of those babies shortly after birth. So there, but she wasn't in the same hospital. That baby was taken to another hospital. So all these traumas around that. Anyway, I don't actually even know if I was breastfed. I don't think I was. I don't know. And now she's gone and I can't ask. But as to your question, I don't ever remember seeing anyone. I wasn't really around babies. So it wasn't really a thing when I was a child. In the 60s. Yeah.
Yeah, great. Thank you.
So I was born in the early 70s, and my mom was an older mom at that point in time because she was a Catholic nun before she was my mom. So, very interesting path to motherhood. Anyway, I am the oldest of 6 siblings, so I had a lot of exposure to babies growing up. Like, there was always a baby. We always had a baby. It felt like it anyway. However, there was no breastfeeding, and some of it was cultural, but some of it was apparently, from what my mom told me, she tried nursing me, and had some problems, some pain, wasn't her perception, right? Making a lot of milk, had pumped or expressed or something. And her mom and then her mom's second husband were there. And, a little bit of breast milk in the, I'm gesturing here, in the bottle, in the container, and it had a bluish tinge to it. And if you're familiar with breast milk, you know that breast milk can come in various shades and that's normal. But my mom didn't know that in the 70s, and her mom didn't know that. And her mom said something, or her mom's husband said something about witch's milk or something like that,
Oh, yeah.
And so the advice that my mom got was to not nurse, to not breastfeed. In my family, there is also a very strong history of breast cancer. And my mom says, and I'm saying my mom says because I don't know how this holds up scientifically. And Janet knows my background is as a nurse, so I do have some background in this. That in all of her screening for cancer over the years, mammograms and then other tests, because she did eventually have breast cancer, that they said that she had very right angles on her milk ducts. And therefore, this is why you had such pain with nursing and why it was so impossible for you. And I'm like, I don't know that really holds up, but that's her version of what somebody told her at some point in time. So, I had lots of experience, making bottles and giving bottles to, warming up bottles. But I had never had any experience with breastfeeding. And I don't know if I ever actually physically saw somebody breastfeeding before I did it. Aside from I did do the breastfeeding classes. And so the instructional videos they show you. But other than that, I don't know if I did.
Yeah. Yeah. Isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
The purpose of the Milk Making Minutes is to explore breastfeeding through the lens of systemic medical and cultural barriers. And this is one of those big cultural barriers, that breastfeeding is a taught behavior. It's a learned behavior. It is actually not an instinctual behavior. Even chimps and gorillas.
Did you hear that story recently?
With the zookeeper?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. There was a gorilla that had given birth to a baby, and her first baby, and she had not cared for it. Her maternal instincts had not kicked in.
Because she had been orphaned and had never really seen people doing this.
Right. So then her second baby, they put a TV in her enclosure that showed gorillas caring for babies and nursing babies. So she gave birth to the second baby. She was doing a much better job of being maternal, but she still had not fed the young gorilla. And so a zookeeper came in with her breastfeeding baby and showed the gorilla how to breastfeed. And then later on that evening, the gorilla breastfed for the first time.
Wow.
Yeah. And so we were not meant to breastfeed in isolation, right? Humans evolved in these large social groups where every infant had between 5 and 12 allo parents, right? That's why parenting feels so hard now, because we're in these tiny social groups. And even in those large groups, those other allo parents would feed the babies. And so if you had trouble feeding, somebody else would just feed. And so here we are, we give birth to a baby, and the first baby we have ever breastfed, it's often the first baby we've ever seen breastfeed.
I remember that you just suddenly took me back to, so I'm at the hospital. It's after my first one is born. And, the nurse is trying to help me position the baby and get the baby breastfeeding. Of course, I had never breastfed before. I didn't know what it was supposed to feel like. I didn't know what was the difference between good and not good in terms of, they talk about a good latch and all those things and you see the pictures, but I didn't know what that felt like. And I had hickeys all over my breast because the baby wasn't even on the right spot.
He wasn't getting to the nipple.
Right. I mean, I was having a hard time seeing what was going on, and he didn't know what he was doing. And when I gained some experience, this is where number 2, 3, and 4 were much easier. By that point, I at least knew how to tell physically the feeling of this is the right or wrong spot. But I didn't know that at first.
Yeah. Yeah. How would you?
Nope.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. That's incredible. Okay.
The isolation is huge. I mean, I had my first baby C-section at the hospital, had the nurse show me. That was it. And then off I went home. I didn't have any other friends who had had babies. So it was just me and her figuring it out. And that, it went okay, thank goodness. I would say too, it did actually. I mean, I remember some pain, but it was okay. I think my only other source of information at that time was Mothering Magazine. That was it, because this is before the internet. So if you remember Peggy O'Meara and Mothering Magazine, that was like every month that it would come, I'd be pouring through it, and hearing birth stories, hearing breastfeeding stories was definitely part of my education.
And so Mothering Magazine was a more sort of naturally minded publication. Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. And so it had stories in it of people giving birth and breastfeeding. Is that correct?
Yeah, telling their stories. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, that would be where I turn to first. Wow. And then other articles about, lactation and all of the things, and parenting. But that was definitely a resource for me at that time.
Yes. So after you did give birth, did you make any friends who were also parents? I know none of your friends going into it were parents, but did you find communities of people who were also feeding babies anywhere?
Yes. The funniest place that I found my first mother friend was in the dressing room of a baby supply, a baby store, baby furniture, baby clothes. And she was already in the dressing room nursing her baby that was about the same age as mine. It was like, oh, can I join you? And we became fast friends.
My goodness, I love
after
this.
that. Yeah.
That is a great story. I love it.
Yeah, that really is. So you just sat in the dressing room and nursed your babies together?
Yep. Yeah. Exchanged phone numbers. And started to meet up a couple times a month and just became friends.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And tell me how supportive did you have a pediatrician caring for your first and your second?
I'm sure I did. I don't remember. I mean, it's been 36 years ago, but what I do remember, and this is where I tried to do things so differently for my own daughter, is I remember flying to Texas with this little baby, and she actually hadn't gotten an ear infection on the plane, I guess, but she was crying. And the question my mom asked multiple times, and maybe your listeners have heard this question, are you sure the baby is getting enough milk? Is your milk good enough for this baby? And the doubt that sows into a new mom. I mean, I still, that's like so profound for me, is the doubt that my own mom, because listen, she didn't know. She had this other experience. And yet when your own mother is doubting the quality of your milk, wow.
Right.
Yeah. So I made it an absolute, of course I think I would have done it anyway, but I made sure to tell my daughter constantly, look at your baby's growing and you're such a good mom, and really helping support her in her own baby feeding journey.
Janet, I love that, because it's a well-meaning question. It's showing the worry of the person who's asking it. It's showing a sense of helplessness, probably, like this baby's crying or this baby's upset and I don't know how to help you. So I'm asking this question because I can't figure it out either. But you're right. I hear so many of my clients come to me doubting their milk supply because other people have planted the seed of doubt. And sometimes it's a family member, and many times it's a pediatrician or somebody else. And pediatricians, they don't get any training on lactation. They get 3 hours in med school. Opposed to an IBCLC like myself, we get 95 hours and have to recertify every 5 years. So it's a big difference. And so when a pediatrician is saying, you must not be making enough milk, then they're going to believe that person in a white coat.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
And then the seeds of doubt are planted, and it's hard to pull them up.
Yeah. Yeah. So I feel like, doing things differently for my daughter. And I will say my daughter, my younger daughter, who is very close to her sister, is a labor and delivery nurse, a midwife, and a doula. And so she was at my daughter's, at their birth, and she stayed there for a week afterwards. And so, nothing like having your sister be your lactation consultant. And, she knew all the different ways to position and what was happening. So that was pretty cool.
That's amazing.
That they had that experience together.
Yes, that is amazing. Yeah, and to have your support too in knowing, okay, I know the things that did not feel good for somebody to say to me, and so I am going to make sure to say the encouraging things.
Yes.
Yeah.
You've heard me now for a few months talking about how much I've enjoyed getting home cooked meals delivered right to my front door from feastandfettle.com. And I'm here today to tell you that if you know somebody who is in the postpartum period, who you would like to provide true support to, that you should go to feastandfettle.com and order home-cooked meals to be delivered right to their front door. One of the biggest barriers to breastfeeding success is a lack of support. A new parent is feeding a baby up to 15 times a day. How on earth do we expect that person to feed that baby that many times, also feed themselves, and provide meals to other members of their family? There's not enough time. You know how hard it is as a busy parent yourself to try to put meals on the table. Go to feastandfettle.com, use my code MILK, MILK, coordinate which meals they would like to have delivered, and send them a week's worth of delicious meals. And be the person who eases the burden for them. What a gift. I can't think of a better way to support somebody in the postpartum period. If you want to have less anxiety and more confidence so that your parenting journey can feel like you always wanted it to feel, then go to my website right now so that you can have a person by your side who not only knows how you feel, but who combines my expertise of lactation with your expertise of your body and your baby to help you make the next right step in your lactation journey, because that's all you really need to do is make the next right step. And right now, that next right step is going to my website, www.quavinbirthservices.com. And I can't wait to see your name pop up in my inbox or on my phone, on my text messages. Talk to you soon.
Yeah. What about you, Jennifer? What happened in the very beginning for you that either helped you along or made things harder?
I would say the thing that made things harder in the beginning was I developed a terrible case of mastitis within 2 to 3 weeks of giving birth to my first son. So my oldest son was born at the beginning of December, and this was approaching around Christmas time, right? And again, it's my first time through. Your first time through, you don't know what normal is. You don't know what not normal is. And Janet, my Bible at the time, I did have the Leche League Womenly Art of Breastfeeding. So that was my book supporting me and teaching me how to do these things. And, it started with kind of a red warm spot on the one breast, and then it was tender, and then it was excruciating pain, just excruciating to nurse him, and yet to not nurse him and just have the milk build up was worse. And this ended up with me in the ER, and oh yeah, you have mastitis and it's like bad enough. We're going to give you some IV antibiotics. And to this day, I can still picture the doctor, and I can't quite remember his name, even though at this point in time, I ended up working at this hospital later. So I knew all these doctors later. The doctor that was on call that poked his head back in the room that said, "Do you need something for pain? I'm going to give you something for pain." I'm like, bless you. Because it was just intolerable almost at that time. But I learned, and I did persevere through it. We did manage to even got home. We were living about 2.5 hours from home, family at that point in time. And you know what? Taking that first big car trip with a newborn is challenging anyway. With a nursing newborn, I mean, I can't just turn around and put a bottle in his mouth. I can still point to the exit where we pulled off, and I, breastfed him on the way home. And I remember I still wasn't feeling good, and we were laying in my mom's bed, and she didn't have experience breastfeeding, as we covered, but she was supportive of me continuing to do it and hesitant at the same time. So she supported me doing it, but the mom in her hated to see that I was in pain doing this. And the pain did not, it didn't persist forever. The antibiotics helped tremendously. The treatment helped, and it did clear up. But that was a big challenge in those early days where I found with my subsequent children, it does take about 6 weeks or even longer to sort of get into your rhythm where it starts feeling more normal and more natural and regulated. And this was my first one, and we didn't have any chance to get to any kind of normal before it was kind of disruptive. And I'm really glad that we made it through that, because although I did end up with maybe 1, maybe 2 in all the children afterwards cases of mastitis, it never was that bad again.
Yeah. Yeah. And if it's happening 3 weeks in, were you in a lot of pain while breastfeeding him?
Yes, I was. It was uncomfortable to start with. And this is where, my lack of experience came into play. I didn't know the line between normal hurting, because this is all new to you, and abnormal hurting. I didn't know what that was. And, Janet, you're nodding. And like so many moms, I was at home. I didn't have anybody there with me, and I didn't know. I think they did have a lactation consultant at the hospital who checked in after birth. What is that, the next day? But there was nobody following up on me at home to say, how's it going, and give feedback.
Yeah. Yeah. And I tell people all the time that when we become mothers, we'll bend over backwards for our kids. We'll do anything. Yes. And so when we're in pain, we often will say, well, I'll just grin and bear it because it's worth it. And what I tell my clients is, think of it this way, that you should be saying, no, I don't have to go through pain because I'm a human being who deserves to feel good. Yeah. So I always tell people, pain is an indication of something going wrong with the milk transfer. And so that means that your baby is not getting the ideal amount of milk, or there's something going wrong with that milk transfer. So if you can't take care of the pain for yourself, then take care of it for your baby, because
that's really good. Really good feedback and advice that I wish somebody had told me. But
yeah, when you were giving birth to babies, there was not covered lactation care. IBCLCs were probably few and far between. If they were around, they were probably not private practice. Maybe you could go to a La Leche League leader. It was just we can hardly, luckily I am able to go bill insurance companies and get most of my clients to get their insurance to pay for my services. But, it's still a fight sometimes. So
I ended up,
go ahead.
So baby number 1 was born, at a small hospital, because I lived in a small town, born at the small hospital. And it was, again, I didn't know what I was doing. I took the childbirth classes, but I didn't know what I was doing. And it ended up being a forceps birth, and that sucked. That was not fun at all. And then, that, and then the nursing problems and blah, blah, blah. And I did things differently with some subsequent births. So just like you, Janet, So the second birth, we had moved to a different town, and I chose a practice that did have a nurse midwife. And we did have the birth at a hospital there. And then birth number 3 and 4, I actually had with a midwife at Wisconsin's first independent freestanding nurse midwife run birth center. And as part of that practice, your package included, like, she came to your house in the days afterward and assessed the baby and assessed mom and assessed how nursing was going. And it was much more the kind of support that I think, women, babies, families really need, because as you both well know, like, getting the baby out is that's just one thing. That's sort of the start in a lot of ways. There's so much that has to happen after that. And just saying, go figure it out is daunting.
Yeah, especially when you have 2 or 3 other kids at home, or even just one. Forget about it. You're not going to be making that appointment sometimes if it's not essential. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. So Janet, tell me the difference for you between that C-section hospital experience and how baby feeding went versus your VBAC home birth and how the postpartum and baby feeding went. Was there a noticeable difference between how supported you felt and how confident you felt with breastfeeding between that first experience and your second?
With my first one, it was me. And I definitely felt like it, and I definitely felt very isolated. My second one, we had moved. We lived in Maine at the time. And so I had the midwife. I had friends who were having babies at the same time. 2 of my friends actually happened to be nurse practitioners, and that was great. One of them was a midwife also. And one of them, her husband, was my child's pediatrician and also a good family friend. So I felt a lot of support and a lot of just socially, everybody was nursing. We're all sitting around nursing our babies. And so that felt like, yes, this is how it's supposed to be. And then, we didn't nurse each other's babies, but we took care of each other's babies. And it was just this amazing community of growing new families. And so that was just a 180 difference in experience. I was remembering, as you were talking, with my older daughter, I nursed until she was about 2.5, which, ooh, man, that had some family comments, let's just say. And I was so grateful because we lived in Maine, we were flying back to Oregon. My husband's dad had just had this massive stroke. No cell phones. Well, this is we're back in the dark ages, as Jen said. We're flying, we land in Chicago, and there's a weather event. And this is just when O'Hare, this terminal, was just getting going. There was no food, nothing. We're in this airport for over 24 hours. I've run out of diapers, but I had my milk supply. So I was able to feed my child. And I remember standing at the podium everybody's there trying to get on a flight. Meanwhile, we don't know what's happening with his dad. And I remember shaking Katie, this is the time to cry. Come on, cry. We got to get on that plane. Right. So anyway, but that was just I'm so glad I was still nursing her. So and then my younger one, she was done when she was done. I think she nursed about a little over a year, but she kind of self-weaned. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. That story of nursing your 2.5-year-old and then it actually serving a safety purpose with no food and being stuck somewhere is amazing. Do you remember any of the comments you got from family members about nursing her?
This was actually from my cousin. We had gotten to where my father-in-law was, and my cousin was there, and he had a baby just a little bit before mine. So around the same age. And Katie needed to nurse. I started nursing and he just looked at me like, you are still nursing? It's like, yes, I am.
Good for you.
Oh, yeah. I was
I
kind of
know.
a rebel as a mom. I was a rebel. Still am.
Yeah.
What can I say?
Right.
Yeah.
That's great. Yeah. I love that. And now you're supporting your children to be rebel parents too and
Yeah.
helping with your grandkids.
Yeah. And I just, support your listeners' shout out. Like sometimes you do have to swim upstream a bit and go recognize, like we talked about Jen's mom, and just recognizing your parents were parenting in a whole different era and they don't actually have the information that you have.
Right. Yeah. And, it's good to hear these stories. Some of my listeners nurse for a very long time and they still feel like they're swimming upstream. When there are all sorts of comments that I get on TikTok and Facebook reels when I talk about nursing beyond infancy. But I just take it back to the science. I actually published an episode. I'll link it in the show notes for all my listeners. I published an episode a couple weeks ago about the science of nursing beyond infancy and how the milk composition changes for a toddler, for instance, and the evolutionary and biological and anthropological age of weaning for humans over the years. It's between 2 and 7, in humans. And if you look at animals and their age of weaning, it's highly variable. And in primates, they can nurse for a long, long time. So, it's just because culturally we don't wean beyond, we don't nurse hardly beyond 6 months or 1 year. It doesn't mean that that's what it comes naturally.
This is where we get into the systemic barriers for so many.
Right.
Because I nursed all of my kids approximately 2-ish years, give or take, for each of them. And I was very, I'll say, lucky to do that. I mean, there is a certain amount of privilege in being able to do that, because it just doesn't work well in our society where you're expected to be back at work at 6 weeks and you're expected to be working full time. And with my oldest, I was working full time, but I worked at a hospital that was like 3 minutes from where we lived. And I pumped while I was at work, which was made a little easier by the fact that I was working at a hospital. So they had, like, I could use the good pump, the like hospital grade one. I had to bring my own tubing and stuff, but I could use the good pump. But it was difficult to find the time to do it because I was a nurse, right? And I remember I rationalized it to myself this way. If people can find time to go out and smoke and nobody questions their smoke breaks, I can take time to pump.
Right.
So that's how I got through that. Although I will say a lot of times my oldest, who to this day is a very stubborn and strong-willed person, he was just like, nope, I shall wait. She'll come home eventually. And he wouldn't take much while I was gone.
And then would he nurse all night?
Oh my gosh, yes. He would nurse a lot while I was home. And I read enough that I'm like, okay, I mean, clearly this is working for him, right? He was not shrinking. He was continuing to grow. He was continuing to thrive. And then with subsequent kids, we moved. I was like working part-time and I would tend to work evening shifts. And then I started transitioning to writing and I was freelancing. But to continue a nursing relationship for months or years in a culture that makes it difficult for moms to physically be with their children.
Yes.
Is such an uphill battle. And I think that's why culturally, what we've defined as normal is really evolutionarily not normal, but it serves the culture. So
exactly. Right. And that's why I tell all of my clients, I'm going to support you in whatever your goal is, whether that's to wean because you know what, your schedule and your lifestyle is just not supporting it and you don't feel sane, because in the end, what matters most, and I know you know this, given the professional work that you do, is to have happy and healthy parents. And so if breastfeeding is making you more anxious and less tuned in to your babies, then let's help you to wean safely so you're not getting mastitis, so that you can be more tuned into your baby. I am a human milk feeding advocate, but not at the expense of your mental health, because there are so many barriers to human milk feeding that if it's getting in the way, then let's help you be happier and healthier, because we know that you can't always be home with your baby. We know that pumps haven't changed in 60 years. We know that workplaces, even though they are supposed to provide you pumping time and space, don't always do it. We know that we have white male dominated workplaces that don't understand what it takes to feed human milk to human babies. So, with so many barriers, there's no guilt in making a different decision.
And you know what? As much as I did put a value on, and I'm very proud that I was able to, nurse all of my babies that long. And I'm really, really glad about that. I am, pro human milk as well. I do think there's benefits to that. But now that they're my youngest is 17, he doesn't care at all at this point. If anything, he's kind of grossed out by the fact, because he's 17. Would he be pretty much equally as strong, smart, and stubborn at 17 if he'd been formula fed? Yeah, he pretty much would, right? Mm-hmm. So with the perspective of time, I can see that, yes, it's important, but it's not as important as it sometimes feels when you're new.
Yes. And that brings us back around to what the both of you do for your own listeners, is bring people to this long game. I'm helping people with this short period, relatively short time in their lives, whether they nurse for a couple of weeks or a few months or a few years, it's really short. But when you're parenting boys, you're going to be the parent of that boy's life for the rest of their life. Mm-hmm. And so whether you nurse them for 2 days or for 3 years, having that long game view of, in the end, they are going to be eating goldfish off the floor. And then they're going to be trying to party with their friends. And then, taking in all sorts of substances I might not want them to. Yes. And breast milk is going to be the last of my problems. Yes. So how, as we wrap up here, what's one piece of wisdom that you would give my Milk Making Minutes listeners about how to gain sort of that long game perspective with both their girls and their boys as they're starting out their parenting journey?
I mean, I think Jen and I talk about this all the time on the On Boys podcast, and it doesn't just apply to boys. It is prioritizing the connection. That is the importance. If you're feeding them a bottle or from the breast, it's about the connection that you're growing with your child. And that's the long game. That's the foundation. That's what's going to hold you through the tweens and the teens and into adulthood.
Infant feeding, whether you are breastfeeding, you're bottle feeding breast milk, you're using formula, whatever, infant feeding is very much a responsive relationship. And you are watching your baby for cues and you are responding to your baby's cues. That's the foundation long term. Watch your kid and sort of follow that lead. It's not putting the kid in charge. That's not what I'm talking about. But your kid gives you signals of what they're ready for. And as you evolve from, just strictly milk to experimenting with other foods, right? Your kid starts showing you when they're ready, when they're interested. And this applies to so many things all throughout life. So for me specifically, it was breastfeeding because that's what I did. It taught me how to be a parent because it is all about that relationship and being responsive.
Yes, I love that. Yeah. And in this day and age, when we have our cell phones in our hands and we're so worn out and so tired, it's so easy to take that feeding relationship and turn it into the time when we scroll. And believe
You know
me,
what?
I've done it. And it's fine to take that brain break. And also, whether you bottle feed or you breastfeed, a couple of feedings a day, take that time to look into your baby's
Yes.
eyes and build that connection. It doesn't have to be every single time, but a few times a day, build that connection and start it early.
I was nursing through the years that the Harry Potter books were continuing to come out. I read a lot of Harry Potter books like over my kids' head while nursing.
Did you ever drop the book on their heads?
I did not drop the book on their head, but all of my children have gotten crumbs on their heads.
Yes. Mine too.
All
I've
of
definitely
them.
dropped a phone on my children's heads.
I do think, those moments of having your baby cradled up in your arm and, they are utterly content, sleep drunk, milk drunk. That's like the moment that I want that back in my head. Like when I'm dying, that is the moment that I'm tearing up thinking about it because they're just so beautiful and so connected. And yes, I read Harry Potter sometimes or, looked at other things, but there are those moments and it makes me tear up and my youngest is 17.
Yeah. Yeah. Any moments like that for you, Janet, as we wrap up?
Absolutely. I mean, I can remember just nursing both my babies and having that intimacy with them has just been, it was just such a good foundation. And now watching my daughter nursing her son and kind of reliving that for myself, but also just seeing what it does for both mom and child and having that kind of, next level perspective is just, it's such a beautiful thing. And yeah, there's the times when she's frustrated because he's just nursed all night and he still wants to nurse. And yet I see Bo needing that. Now it's not so much about the food, the nutrition, it's about the comfort and the safety and the connection between the two of them as he's launching out into the world, as his language is developing and his movement. He's got that home to come home to.
That's beautiful. Well, thank you two so much, not only for coming to share your experiences from not too long ago on the Milk Making Minutes. Your experiences are not the longest ago that I've had, by the way. And more importantly, for the work that you are putting out into the world. Thank you for taking your wisdom that you have gained and sharing it with those of us who are coming behind you. It's so meaningful. And, so many of us can't go to our own parents because we're forging a different path. And so it's so nice to know that there are moms out there that we can look up to. We can have pseudo moms out there who are giving that wisdom to those of us who want to build that type of connection with our kids. And so thank you so much for creating On Boys and putting your hard work out into the world like that.
Thank you.
Yeah. And so where can my listeners find you besides on the podcast?
There is the podcast, and I am at boysalive.com. I do family coaching and webinars, so you can follow me on Instagram, boys.alive, but boysalive.com.
Great. And best place to find me is at buildingboys.net. It's in the process of a redesign, but hopefully it will be much easier to navigate very soon. And then you'll be able to easily see my newsletter, my books, and I've got all kinds of blog posts and things from many years.
Oh, great. That's awesome. So that was Janet first, Jennifer second, and I'll have everything linked in the show notes so people can easily
Thank you for the work that you are doing supporting new parents and new families, because that is, I'm just like thinking, wow, people can now listen to a podcast to get this support. Like, that would have been earth-changing for me back in the day.
I know. What does Michael Scott say? How the turntables turn.
Exactly.
Yes.
All right.
They've
Thank you
turned.
so much.
Thank you, Lo.
If you can tell just from this little snippet of a conversation that you could use more of Janet and Jen in your life, then go ahead and subscribe to On Boys on wherever you get your podcasts. And if you're looking for a starting place, I recommend listening to the episode from June 29th called Sue Adkins Tackles Common Parenting Questions, because this one will really apply to everybody, whether or not you have boys or girls. And it sounds like you get to listen in on a conversation between three really smart and thoughtful parents who have raised their kids in the way that you want to raise your children. And they're now, mostly on the other side. And you get to just eavesdrop. So go check it out. And then why don't you come on over to the Making Minutes community group and let's discuss some of the barriers that were talked about in this episode. Did any of these barriers get in the way of baby feeding for you? Did you get enough time off to feed your babies? Was pumping challenging? Did you have people at work give you a hard time? Have you had friends or family members question how long you nursed your babies? I want to know about it. And while we're talking about barriers, why not eliminate a barrier for yourself or for a friend in the postpartum period by going to feastandfettle.com and ordering home-cooked meals for the week so that you can focus on what matters most to you and not have to focus on what you're going to put on the dinner table. Talk to you soon. Bye.